Another horror anthology film, but this time I saw a horror anthology film that I had wanted to see for a long time. It wasn't just a random movie that a friend of mine recommended. My boy Zach had recommended Creepshow to me for a long time. This is one of his favorite movies. I have seen the sequel. It's crazy that I have never actually seen the original. I am aware of the film. I was before watching it. It's a horror classic. If you're a horror fan, especially a horror fan of films from the 80s, I mean, you know this movie. I mean, it's directed by George A. Romero of the Dead trilogy. Great movies those are. I've seen all of them. They're all fantastic, and they're each in own way. Love those. And you got Stephen King in there, writing the stories and the screenplay. Amazing, when it comes to horror stories, at least. He's awesome. And it's got like Tom Savini doing the special effects. I mean, it's kind of a recipe for 1980s horror success. And so, I thought the Twilight Zone movie, as far as horror anthology goes, I thought it was pretty good. Although I haven't seen very many horror anthology films, I did like the second Creepshow a lot. And I gotta say, after watching the original Creepshow, it has 5 stories as opposed to 3 in the sequel. In the sequel, I thought the first story was awesome. Second story was pretty good. Third story, didn't really like it. All in all, I thought the second film was pretty damn good, right? If you can have 2 good and 1 bad, I'll take that. In this one, though, it is a 2-hour-long movie, but there's 5 stories, including a little wraparound. So I guess we'll call it 6 stories. And each is about 20 minutes long. In the sequel, each one's about a half hour long, so there's, a little bit more time to develop the story, and, develop some of the characters. And, the shorter anthology skits or shorts, I suppose, I don't necessarily think it's a big issue. Some stories, I think, feel a little rushed. Some feel a little slow, and some feel just right. Because I think you get a pretty good balance of stories in this film. I think you do. I think it's really well balanced. I mean, when you have 5 stories, you're bound to have, at least 1 or 2, I would think, as a horror fan or as a film fan that you would enjoy, or, piques your fancy of a story like, damn, yeah, that's a great idea for, a horror film or just an anthology short. And so, in the words of my boy, horror movie review guy, Pat, bless you, man. We miss you down here on Earth. May you rest in peace. When he was talking about this movie, because I watched the video as soon as I finished it, he was like, the great thing about Creepshow is if, you weren't a fan of one of the skits or stories, I guess, you got another one coming up in like 15 minutes. So, pretty awesome. I do like the wraparound from the beginning to the end of the, it's got the guy from Halloween 3 in it, and I think the Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I cannot remember his fucking name, though, but he's a pretty infamous 80s actor. I want to say it's Tom Matthews, but that's not right. That's the guy from frickin' Jason Lives. But, he throws out the comic book or whatever, and you got the voodoo doll. It's really cool. I like it a lot more than I like the wraparound from the Twilight Zone. But I'll talk about each of the 5 stories. It has been a while since I've watched the movie, but it's still very fresh in my mind. And it's stuck with me enough after one watch where I can still recollect all of the stories. The first story I'm not a huge fan of, but I am a fan of some aspects of it. And it's like, with this movie, it's a horror film for sure, but I don't really want to watch it with the mindset of, okay, I really want to get scared. I really want to get freaked out. I'm looking for something really dark. That's not the case at all. Whenever I'm watching this film, when I will watch it again, or when I was watching it, I got the notion pretty early on that this is a film you want to watch with just an entertainment factor. All right, maybe it's not a film you want to read heavily into and look for some sort of symbolism or some sort of deeper meaning, like you're watching like Rosemary's Baby or something. No, this is a film you want to watch just to see some cool effects, some fun stories, and just a good time, similar to like Brain Dead. Although they're two completely different movies. They're two movies that are successful in their own way, based on the fact that they're horror films, but you're not going to be terrified. You're going to be entertained, and ultimately that's what you go to watch movies for. But the first story, I'm not huge on it. I like some of the cool smoky graveyard atmosphere, but the concept's kind of stupid. Because you've got the bitchy daughter of like this super rich family who killed her father in the past. She brings him cake at his grave every year on his like death reunion, which I believe falls close to Father's Day. And like she forgets to bring him cake and gets drunk. And I guess because he didn't get his cake, he rises from the grave, and it's kind of like a slasher film. He just kind of picks them off one by one. It's really not very memorable. It's kind of bland. I really don't have much to say about it. Some of the scenes in the graveyard outside the house are kind of cool, but like the main character, Bedelia, which I only remember her name because throughout the whole story, the fucking like undead father is like, "Where's my cake, Bedelia?" Yeah, it's kind of a shit show, but she doesn't even play the best bitchy character in the movie, the bitchy woman that you're supposed to dislike. She doesn't even play the best one. So the first story, not a big fan of. The second story, it's more of a sci-fi than a horror. I guess it's still considered horror. There's no gore or anything. And you got your boy Stephen King as the lead actor in the short, which is kind of interesting. Kind of you never really see. I was watching this film with my aunt actually, and she was like, "Wow, I've never seen Stephen King in a non-cameo role." And he's literally, when it comes to like dream and or not hallucination, but like imagery in his head, he's the only actual character in this story. But it's kind of cool. I like the concept. You got the little cool crashing meteor. You got a few funny lines there, meteor shit. And I especially like the slow transformation of my boy Jordy, aka Stephen King, turning into like a ghillie suit man. It's a slow, it just kind of shows you periodically throughout time as he slowly becomes overtaken by this vegetation, I guess. And like, I do like the scenes where he's like debating on whether or not he wants to go seek help, or he's conflicted because he's embarrassed and he thinks people are gonna, the doctor is gonna call him crazy or this, that, and the third, and he's just like, he's torn, and ultimately like he's all gillied up. Shout out to Call of Duty 4, and he like blows his brains out and it's like, instead of like blood and guts, it's like soil and moss. I don't know. I think it's pretty funny. This is definitely one of those stories that highlights the fact that you want to watch this film with the intent of not being scared by virtue of a horror film. And this is more of a sci-fi story. But I think this story, I still don't know how to feel about Stephen King's performance because it's just so absolutely over the top and just ridiculous, but that's kind of what they're going for. And I can't decide on whether or not his performance was amazing or his performance was ridiculous. It's definitely the weirdest and the most wacky, I think, of all the stories. But I don't mind it. I don't mind it. I prefer it over the first story. The third story, however, the third story is amazing. I really love this one a lot. This is definitely my favorite story. Spoiler alert of them all. Actually, I really like this story. I'll save because I still got two more after this to talk about. This one has got the two biggest it's got the two biggest actors in it. My boy Leslie Nielsen, Ted Danson. They're awesome. Leslie Nielsen plays about as good of a bad guy as you could possibly get. And I mean, what a fucking crazy concept this is, right? Threatening somebody with a gun, holding them at gunpoint to fucking shroud themselves in sand on a beach in a private freaking deserted island on a beat. Like, dude, that is unbelievable. Like, that it's such a fucking crazy story, and it's executed so perfectly well. Like, and I was thinking about it, like, you know, I was comparing it to the final story of Twilight Zone, which I said was pretty much perfect. Like, that story was perfectly executed. And I mean, the only gripe I have, and it dates back to naturally trying not to get, you know, watching this movie to not get scared and not, you know, taking the scary aspects too seriously. At the very end, whenever Ted Danson and his wife or girlfriend or lover, I guess, come back to life, they're kind of ridiculous. Ted Danson looks like Bub from Day of the Dead, which is cool. I like that a lot. But it's kind of goofy. But other than that, I mean, I can hold my breath for a very long time. Classic line. And yeah, I mean, I think the story is fantastic. I think it's amazing. It's awesome. I love it a lot. The fourth story I like a lot as well. And I think this one is the most, it's simple, but it's also very complex. The crate, right? And, you know, it's very simple in that, you know, it's a story of a guy finding a crate with a monster inside, and he's trying his best to keep that monster shielded away from everybody because it's, you know, got a monster inside of it that kills people, right? But it is also intertwined, like that story runs parallel with another story of a guy who fucking hates his wife, and these two subplots ram into each other amazingly, right? And this story has some pretty cool special effects. Shout out to Tom Savini, because this is really, I mean, this first story has a little bit of blood and guts in it, but not much. There's really no gore in the second story or the third story, really. And so you finally get to see Tom Savini's masterful makeup and special effects work on full display. And it doesn't disappoint. It's pretty fucking good. Yeah, I like it. The monster itself is very obviously a puppet, but, you know, once again, I've talked ad nauseum at this point about, you know, taking this movie seriously when it comes to the chill, scary factor. Not really bothering with that. So, you know, it works. But the best part about this story is the other subplot that runs parallel with, you know, the professor finding this crate with this monster in it that has killed a student and a janitor. We've got another professor who has this bitch of a wife, right? The most insufferable, unlikable character, female character, I think, that I've ever seen in any movie ever. She is just the worst. And he's got these funny ass, like, daydream sequences where he fucking shoots his wife in the head and he fucking strangles. Like, he has fucking dreams of him killing his wife on 2 separate occasions. But anyway, it's so funny, right? Like, this professor calls his friend, his other professor, and he's like, oh my god, there's dead bodies, there's this crate from like the 1800s with a monster in it, just killed the janitor, just killed a student, I need you to get the fuck over here, like, this is nuts, I don't know what to do. And he's like, oh my god, that's crazy. And so he's like, okay, I could call the police, I could do something, anything really, but first, let me try and knock out 2 birds in one stone. Let's get rid of this monster, but also let's get rid of another monster, which is my fucking wife. And he fucking lures, oh my god, he lures his wife into, you know, underneath the staircase with the monster, gets her killed. I don't know, that shit was just like, wow, that's fucking ridiculous. Like, it was pretty funny. I don't think it's quite as good as the third story, but it's unique, right? It's simple but complex at the same time, and I really like how, you know, both of those parts of the story kind of run into each other. And the ending is kind of, I'm not a huge fan of the ending, but all in all, I think it's a pretty good story. But the last story, this story has a few things going for it, but ultimately I think it kind of falls flat. And, you know, I was talking about how the pacing at times is good, bad, and great, or like it's okay, it's bad and it's great. This is one of the situations like in the third story and the fourth story, I thought the pacing was good. The first story, the pacing was fine. The second story, the pacing was good. The pacing on this last story, not a big fan of, because it all kind of happens really fast and it feels like this story was kind of like rushed and like incomplete and just not nearly as fleshed out as really any of the other stories, which is kind of a shame. It only has one setting. I do like the horror aspects of bugs because, you know, it's not really something that you have to worry about when it comes to like special effects or playing on somebody's fears, even though, you know, this is a very real fear of a lot of people. Again, I was watching this with my aunt, and the one time she was grossed out in the entire movie was whenever she saw all of the roaches. And, you know, it's definitely a skin crawler for sure. But, you know, I was going to say that the wife character from the fourth story, the crate, was the most unlikable character that I've ever seen in a movie. But I had to stop myself and say the most unlikable female character I've ever seen in a movie, because this guy, bro, Upston Pratt, holy shit. He gives her a run for her money as the most unlikable character in any movie, and then some, and just puts it in a hyperblast. I mean, this dude is pretty much the worst possible person, right? He's racist. He's a fucking hypochondriac. He is a narcissist to the max. I mean, and he's also a rich billionaire CEO. Like, this dude is so fucking demented. Fucking one of his employees kills himself, leaves his family because of the overburdening stress that my boy Upson has put down on him, because he just is making him work like a dog. And he like laughs about it on the phone to his fucking wife. Like, yeah, he's crazy. I mean, he absolutely gets what he deserves. And so I think that's one of the benefits. Like I said, this story has some upside. All right, it does a few things well. You want to hate the main character, and you absolutely hate the main character. You want him to fucking die, and you want him to fucking taste defeat and get what he deserves, and he does. And ultimately, you want to get grossed out and creeped out by the, you know, malevolent force, if you will, or the antagonist of the story, which is, I guess, the bugs, and, you know, the onslaught of the roaches. And it does, like, so it does some things well, but I don't know, it does not feel as good as a lot of the other stories in the movie. And I mean, personally, I kind of go back and forth lately between this and the first story, but I can come to the conclusion that Creepshow, it's a great horror anthology. I love it. 3 out of the 5 stories, in my opinion, are, you know, definitely worth watching. But it starts kind of slow and it ends kind of shittily. The wraparound is nice though. I touched on that earlier. It ends off the film pretty well, but the 5th story could kind of do without. The first story could kind of do without. You know, I don't think either of them are terrible, but man, if you were to, you know, flesh out the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th stories in a similar way to how they did the 3 stories in the sequel, perhaps, you know, you'd have yourself an even better film. Though ultimately, this movie is hailed as one of the best horror anthology films out there. It's, you know, as I said, horror classic. Every horror fan pretty much has at least heard of this movie. A lot of them have seen it. And I had heard of this film forever. Finally saw it. And yes, I think it definitely does live up to the hype. It's a horror classic. I would say I prefer it to the Twilight movie, definitely. And yeah, I mean, all around the board, the acting performances are top notch. Leslie Nielsen, Ted Danson, I mean, they fucking kill it. Even, you know, Upson Pratt, he plays an unlikable old mean bastard really well. I mean, he does. The special effects, Tom Savini, I mean, he is awesome as always. I really like the work they did in the 2nd story as well. Shout out to Bub. The only bad thing I could say about this film really is you shouldn't really watch it with the expectation of getting scared or freaked out. I think you should watch it with the expectation of seeing just an all-around good film that is going to make you smile. and I think it did that really well. Starts kind of slow, doesn't finish the best, but I'm gonna give it a 4. I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5. If it wasn't for the first and the fifth, I'd give it a 5 out of 5. If we just had those three, if we just had 2, 3, and 4, it would be a 5. But it is what it is. The sequel's great. The first one's great. Haven't seen the third one, but Creepshow, I would recommend it to horror fans. I would recommend it to film fans. I'd recommend this movie to anybody because ultimately it's an anthology film. Shout out to Pat. We love you. We miss you. Rest in peace. If you don't like one of the stories, you got another one coming up in 15 minutes, and I think that there's a little bit of everything for pretty much any fiction fan to enjoy. 4 out of 5. It's a classic.